Horror movie guy, and in today's video, me and the horror movie uncle are going to be talking about a horror movie from every year of my uncle's life. So,
Yeah. So basically, this is kind of going to be probably an ongoing series of
yeah,
videos here, talking about my favorite horror movie from every year since I've been alive. I was born in 1985, and I've seen a lot of horror movies. Obviously, the horror movie guy, I've shown him a lot of horror movies. So I wanted to talk about my favorite horror movie from every year since I've been alive. So I think in this first video, we're just going to talk about the second half of the 80s, which is, I was born in 85, so the second half of the 80s is the time when I was alive. Obviously, I wasn't really watching horror movies when I was 5 years old, but I've seen lots of horror movies from the 80s. Like, probably most of you watching this video have seen lots of horror movies from the 80s. So, that's kind of be the gist of these series of videos. And we'll just start off. So, from 1985, my favorite horror movie is Life Force. Now, Life Force is, 1985. It's directed by Tobe Hooper. You guys might know Tobe Hooper is the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and also the director of Poltergeist. So anyway, Life Force, really quick, because I don't think we're not going to spend too much on all
yeah,
of these, but
then that
it
would
would
be a
take
lot.
forever. But yeah, really quick, Life Force is kind of a hard movie to describe because it almost seems as though there's like three or four movies going on here. But basically, what it is that there's a group of astronauts that finds this comet, and on the comet there's these aliens, humanoid aliens, and something happens, and their spaceship crashes onto Earth, and they get the astronauts, and they're really messed up. Like the astronauts are have all kind of gone crazy, and the aliens have sort of been let loose, and they're kind of space vampires, if that makes sense to people. They suck the life force, which is where the title, they suck the life force out of people. So what when I say that this movie is sort of like three or four movies in one, what I mean is that the first part of the movie where they're in space is kind of like Alien, if you guys have seen that. The second part of the movie is kind of like an Invasion of the Body Snatchers type movie. If you guys have seen, particularly like the '78 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, then the third part of the movie almost turns into like a zombie invasion type movie because all of the people that the aliens suck the life force out of sort of become zombies. And then, so the zombies then converge on London, which is the main city in Life Force. So then the British military has to get involved, and then it sort of turns into like a battle movie, sort of like a versus like War of the Worlds type thing. Um, so anyway, this is just a really, it is a bat crap crazy movie. There is so much going on here. I know that there was like a lot of production problems with this movie, but it's just so much fun. If you guys love cheesy, crazy horror movies from the 80s, this is a sci fi horror movie. You're going to see some crazy out there stuff in this movie. You're going to see some outrageous special effects. You're going to see nudity. You're going to see violence. You're going to see Patrick Stewart kissing Steve Railsback. If that does it for you, that's what you're going to see in this movie. It is such an outrageous movie. But anyway, that's Life Force from 1985. Um, so the horror movie guy, I don't think you've seen that one.
Not seen Life Force yet.
Okay. Yeah, well, that should be on the
Yeah,
list.
definitely.
Okay, 1986 is The Fly, which is David Cronenberg's version of The Fly, which you have not seen.
I've not seen.
You've not seen
But
it.
I
Okay.
know.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, David Cronenberg's version of The Fly. Obviously, this is a remake of The Fly from the 1950s. It stars Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis. I think that probably most people, well, I mean, maybe not most, but a lot of people who are watching this video has probably seen the David Cronenberg, Jeff Goldblum Fly from the 1980s. But anyway, just really briefly, Jeff Goldblum plays a scientist who is trying to figure out a way to discover teleportation. So he creates these pods that are teleportation pods, and he tests it out by teleporting himself from one pod to another, except that a fly gets into the teleporting pod with him, and sort of the fly gets mangled up with his DNA. So he sort of combines with the fly, and he sort of starts getting attributes of a fly's DNA, which at first is kind of cool because he becomes really strong and everything. But as you can probably figure out, there's more to that. He starts getting sick and everything. And then Gina Davis, who is sort of like a reporter in this movie, but develops a relationship with Jeff Goldblum's character. Anyway, it's just a really, really good movie. If you guys are at all familiar with David Cronenberg's other work, there's a lot of really great body horror in this. And it's probably not too much of a stretch to say that this movie is sort of an allegory for like disease in the 1980s, and very much what was going on at this time was sort of the very first emergence of like AIDS as a disease was just happening. This is 1986, so like this was really early on in the AIDS, when AIDS was just happening. People really didn't know what AIDS was, but you can sort of see that like this movie is kind of making a commentary about disease, in particular AIDS. When Jeff Goldblum's body deteriorates and everything, it's very much David Cronenberg. A lot of the time, will sort of make those sort of political statements in his movie. Anyway, The Fly from 1986.
And then in 1987, we chose Evil Dead.
Evil Dead 2.
Or Evil Dead 2, I should say.
Yeah.
Which is...
yeah. Have we talked about Evil Dead? Like, have we done a full length?
We've not... I mean, in our, like, every horror franchise, we talked about it a little bit, but not really in depth.
So, yeah, Evil Dead 2 from 1987 is directed by Sam Raimi, obviously. It is a sort of... It's halfway a remake of the original Evil Dead and then halfway a sequel. It's a remake up to a point, and then it sort of goes its own way. Starring, obviously, Bruce Campbell, the amazing Bruce Campbell as Ash. And yeah, so it is, I think a lot of you guys have probably seen Evil Dead 2. If there's any movie, well, I think you guys have probably seen Evil Dead 2. But yeah, basically what it is that a group of friends, college-age friends, goes to a cabin in the woods, and they find this book called the Necronomicon, and of course they read from the book, which, if you're in a horror movie, you know you shouldn't be reading from a book. And some crazy stuff happens. They get possessed by the Deadites, which,
are kind of like zombies.
yeah, kind of like zombies or demons or whatever.
Yeah,
And
they all like a bunch of stuff like the tree. They're in
mhm,
a forest, so like the trees trying to come alive and
mhm.
attack. Uh, and yeah,
Yeah, and the possession sort of gets into Bruce Campbell's hand, so he has to cut off his hand, and that's one of the really interesting parts of Evil Dead 2.
yeah,
Um, Another thing that's interesting about Evil Dead 2 is where if you saw Evil Dead 1, Evil Dead 2 is much more
campy.
campy, and a lot more comedy
Yeah,
is played into Evil Dead 2. Not as much as like the third movie, Army of Darkness, but there's a lot more tongue-in-cheek humor, um, and it plays into the comedy more than in the first one.
yeah,
And there's a lot of really great makeup effects in this movie. If you guys are familiar with Greg Nicotero or K&B Effects, this is one of the first films that they worked on.
yeah,
Greg Nicotero, those guys worked on Evil Dead 2. And you can really see that even back then, when they were first starting out, those guys were really at the top of their game as far as doing makeup effects and everything. Um, and if you guys have any of the home video releases of Evil Dead 2, like the DVD or the Blu-ray or whatever, there's really good behind the scenes footage showing a lot of how they did the special effects, the special makeup effects, and everything. I really do recommend you guys tracking that down. I think some of that stuff is on YouTube as well.
yeah,
Um, it's worth a watch just because this is like, again, this is like really low budget filmmaking. Um, has a little bit higher of a budget than the first Evil Dead, but still we're talking, well under $1 million for Evil Dead 2, which even in the 80s is not that much money. But yeah, Evil Dead 2. Um, Also, just briefly for 1987, I do want to mention Hellraiser because that almost was my pick for 1987, but Evil Dead 2 just squeaked it out.
yeah.
Um, but if you're looking for another one from 1987, then Hellraiser.
And then in 1988, we have Friday the 13th, The New Blood,
Part 7.
Part 7, The New Blood.
Yeah. So, Part 7, we have Jason. Um, Sort of basically the plot of this is Jason versus Carrie.
Yeah,
So what it is that there's this girl, Tina, who is at Camp Crystal Lake, and she's with her psychiatrist. And her psychiatrist is basically figuring out that Tina has all of these sort of psychokinetic powers. Like she can move things with her mind, she can do a lot of sort of magic things, which, if you guys know the movie Carrie, it's very similar
yeah,
to what Carrie can do. Um, and This is probably my favorite Friday the 13th movie. Um, I think it is. It's my favorite Friday the 13th movie. May not be the best made or like the most well written or the most well acted, but as far as like just having a good time watching a Friday the 13th movie, I think you can't go wrong with Part 7. Also, this is the first film in the series where Kane Hodder plays Jason. Kane Hodder, of course, being the actor who played Jason the most often. He played in Part 7 all the way up through I think Jason X in 2002. So for I think about 4 or 5 films, he played Jason, which is far more than any other single actor played the character. Um, Also, this film was directed by John Carl Buchler, who, if you guys are familiar with uh, Charles Band's company, Empire Pictures, did a lot of the special effects. Before he became a director, he did a lot of the special effects and special makeup effects for Charles Band's Empire Pictures. So if you think of a lot of the early Empire Picture stuff, like uh, what am I thinking of? Troll, um, or like Crawl Space, those types of movies, Cellar Dweller, some of the stuff on Reanimator and From Beyond, I'm pretty sure was done by John Carl Buchler. Don't quote me on that. I think those ones might be a different one, but like creature effects were done by John Carl Buchler, and this movie was directed by John Carl Buchler, Friday the 13th, Part 7, which actually does show that because this one does have some really good makeup effects and some really interesting kills. In fact, this movie has my favorite Jason kill of any of the Friday the 13ths, where there's a girl in a sleeping bag, and Jason takes the sleeping bag and hits it really hard against a tree. And apparently, um, the MPAA, which is the ratings, the organization that does the ratings, like R, PG-13, etc., for the United States, had a problem with the fact that in the original version of that scene, Jason hit the sleeping bag up against the tree numerous times. They thought that that was too violent, so they had to cut it back to just one time. And actually, interestingly enough, it actually works better, I think, if you just hit it against one time, because it just shows, I think, that Jason is so strong that he can literally kill somebody just by hitting her up against the tree in the bag one time. One of the rare instances in which the MPAA forced a cut that actually made the film, I think, better. But on that road too, this film was probably the Friday the 13th got cut the most by the MPAA. I think that in 88, 87, the MPAA was really cracking down on a lot of these slasher movies. Um, and so a lot of this movie got cut down quite a bit as to what the original intention of what the kills were supposed to be. And again, if you guys do have any of the home video releases, the DVD or the Blu-ray releases of this movie, Friday the 13th, Part 7, there is some existing footage of what the original kill sequences were. It's not the greatest shape of footage. It's sort of like a VHS quality footage, but it does give you a little bit of an idea of what some of it might have looked like if it was released in its uncut original form. And anyway, you can probably find that on YouTube as well. And it's interesting to look up just to see what the original intention was for those scenes. Anyway, also for 1988, I did want to briefly mention Child's Play, because that was also one that could very easily have been my pick for 1988 as well. Child's Play. Just Friday the 13th, Part 7 just eked it out just a little bit. And then finally, for this video, from 1989, we have the movie Intruder, which is probably the movie on this list that people are least familiar with, I think, because it's sort of a little bit more of an underground film. It's maybe less known. It is a slasher film that takes place in a supermarket. And basically, what happens in it is that during like the overnight shift at a supermarket, there is an unidentified slasher uh, stalker guy who uses the implements of the supermarket as his slasher killing items. So like he goes to the butcher shop and uses all of like the butcher shop things like the meat cutter um, and all of the other things in the supermarket to use to use as the for the kills in this movie. Um, anyway, it's made by the same people who did the Evil Dead movies. Not Sam Raimi did not direct this movie. It was directed by Scott Speedman, who was a producer on Evil Dead 1 and 2. But Sam Raimi does have a small role in this movie, as does his brother Ted Raimi. Bruce Campbell has a small role in this movie, and if you guys have seen the first two Evil Dead movies, a lot of the same actors who are in the first two Evil Dead movies also do show up in this movie as well. Anyway, it's a pretty good slasher movie. It was a Charles Band production. I don't think it was under the Full Moon banner. I just think he produced it and he distributed it. I don't think Full Moon had existed just yet when this came out, so I think he just produced it. Anyway, 1989 is not the greatest year as far as horror is concerned. There's not that many great picks out there, but Intruder is a pretty good movie. It's pretty short. It's under 90 minutes, so I would recommend trying to track down the uncut Blu-ray or DVD if you guys can find it, because if you guys get the R-rated version, it is almost unwatchable because it cuts away from nearly everything. But it's a pretty decent little slasher movie from the 80s.
So yeah, this is part one of the horror movie Uncle's horror movies of his life. Please like and subscribe. Comment what your favorite movies from these years are, and
yeah, if you guys have, especially, I know that 85 is a pretty stacked year as far as horror movies are concerned, and a lot of you probably are screaming out, "What about Reanimator? What about Day? What about Day of the Dead? What about Return of the Living Dead?" You know, and I'm like, well, yeah, you know, when if you guys want to, you know, shout out those movies in the comments, or any other movies from 85 through 89, definitely tell us what.
Yeah, we'll make sure that. I mean, I read all the comments, so.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, make sure you hit the notification bell for more videos for part 2 and more videos like this. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Bye.